When the duplication is more, at that time we are going to have more redundancy. So here redundancy is nothing but it's duplication. When we are using this object oriented database management system, at that time that will allow me to store that variable which I wanted to access frequently. When we are talking about the multiple user interface, each user should get the different interface based on their role. Hello everybody, a warm welcome to one and all. Welcome back to the session 3 of Unit 1 of BCA's 4th semester, the subject called Database Management System, in short DBMS. I am Rohini TS, Department of Computer Science, Vidyashram First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. So we are in the session 3. In the previous session, that is with respect to the recap of the previous session, we had discussion regarding this characteristics of the database. There we got to know the characteristics of database, and also I have discussed regarding the actors on the scene. So that includes end users, database administrator, and also we have a database designer, application programmers. Everybody there we have learnt in the previous session, and also we have learnt regarding the workers behind the scene. So tool developers, and also this include implementation team. So this is what we have learnt in the previous session. So in our today's session, we're gonna see what are the advantages that I can get with using this DBMS approach. That is advantages of using DBMS approach, and it is necessary to know when I should not use a DBMS. So as we know that we have several advantages, applications of DBMS, then also it is mandatory to know when we are not supposed to use a DBMS. So now we'll see regarding this advantages of using DBMS first. What is the first advantage that I have here? Controlling redundancy. So before that, you just visualize yourself. Consider we have a university, right? So in that university database, I have many tables. So among that, you just imagine I have one student table, and also I have one more account section table. Okay, so student table as well as I have account section table. So these are the two tables which is of a university database itself. Okay, so in the student table, I am going to write the details of a student, like with respect to student ID, student name, their personal detail, everything that I am going to write in the student table. So when it comes to the account table, there also I am going to take the student details as well as their student ID, name, and what is their personal detail. Along with that, I will take the information which is related to the account details, like whether they have paid the fee or not. Are they taking any hostel facility? Or they are taking any of the bus facility, transportation facility. So for all those things, whether they have paid or not, that I am going to store in my account details or account table. So if you consider the student details that is present both in the student table as well as in the account table, so do you think it is efficient or effective in order to store the student details more than one time in a single database? Somehow it is not so efficient. So that means duplication is more. So when the duplication is more, at that time we are going to have more redundancy. So here redundancy is nothing but it's duplication. So in order to minimize that duplications, I am going to create or I am going to use this DBMS. So this DBMS will going to help us in order to control the redundancy. That means duplication will be less. So if the duplication is less, then the memory utilization will be less. So the proper memory utilization will going to be takes place, so that we can have the efficient and effective usage of this DBMS software. So when it comes to here, so here I am going to have a student ID, name, as well as this personal details. So as we all know that each student will going to have a unique ID. So just by making use of that student ID, I am going to store the account details. So if I say student ID 1, so then the student ID is enough for me in order to get the details of that student. So with the help of that student ID only, I can get to know what is the name of that student and what course he has opted, whether he has paid fee or not, has he taking any of the transportation facilities and all. That I can check with the help of this student ID itself. So in the database management system, this will allow us to store the unique data, so that no need to have a duplication more than one, so that it will going to control the redundancy. So that data normalization, we are taking a removing or we are deleting all the duplicate data. If it is presenting more than one time in any number of table, that needs to be removed or deleted. That is called as what? Normalization. So when we are doing this normalization, so it is necessary use control redundancy in order to improve the performance of queries. So then there will be no inconsistent data. Sometimes I might miss updation of student details in the account details, so that at that time the details of a student somehow it is inconvenient or it is inconsistent. So that when we are using this normalization, at that time it removes all these difficulties. It will remove the duplication is also reduced and inconsistent data is also reduced, and it will going to reduce the memory utilization, because if I am storing the same data more than one time, that is such a wastage of memory. So if we have a database, then the redundancy will be controlled. So that will going to help us in order to improve the performance. So this is what first advantage, that is with respect to controlling redundancy. So next what we have here, restricting unauthorized access. As the name indicate, unauthorized, they are not authorized access. So but this DBMS is restricting the unauthorized access. So in what way? Consider one example here. Consider the employment or consider any of the organization database. So at that time, that comprises of a number of tables, right? So in first table, I am going to store the details of an employee. That is what their personal details you imagine. So I am taking the details of an employee, and also have one more table called account section. So one more table called account section. So do you think everybody can access this table account section? Because whatever the data and information that I am going to store in the account section is considered as what? Somehow confidential data will be there in the account table. I can't allow everybody to access the details of this account. So only authorized user, only genuine user can access this. So for that purpose, they are going to provide, or DBA, database administrator, will going to provide some password. So with the help of that password only authorized user can access the account details. Those who are working as a clerk or account section employees, they only have the accessibility to access the table called account section. That means I can save the confidential data. So that is what restricting unauthorized access. So if you are restricting the unauthorized access, or if you are not allowing the unauthorized access, then there will be more security for our data and information which is resides on the database. So we can get that benefit when we are using this DBMS. So you can see here, restricting unauthorized access, it provides the security and authorization subsystem. Only if you have a ID along with a password, then only you can access the content. So if you consider the DBMS, we have n number of users. So when we have large amount of data, then providing of a security is also very important. So if I am not providing security, then there will be a chance of misusage of the data and information, that too with respect to the large amount of database. Then we have to suffer a lot. So that it is necessary in order to provide a security and should not access or should not allow the accessing of unauthorized users. And also you have to have a privileged software. For example, as we all know that we have many types of user, isn't it? So that comprises of database administrator, and also we have a database designer, analyst, and application programmer. Each users or each person should get the privileged software. That means you have to provide one kind of software for database administrator. So everybody has owned their software. So with the help of their software, they are going to perform their operation in an efficient manner. For example, only neighbor parametric user can only access the content. Those who are using regularly, they must have some privileged software in order to access the content regularly. For example, if they wanted to create one more account table, at that time for the database administrator, I have to give some privileged software. So if I'm giving a privileged software to every kind of user, then one user will not going to interrupt the working of another user, so that we can ensure the security. So that is what related to this restricting unauthorized access. We'll see the next advantage, that is related to providing persistent storage for program objects. So you already know that operations, what I can perform on the data structure, isn't it? So when it comes to the DBMS, here also it is necessary, like we have a data structure. So in that I have to specify what kind of data I'm using, right? So if I'm using integer, I have to take only integer values. If I'm using floating point or any of the character, with respect to particular data type, I have to use the data. Once the usage of that variables got over, then it needs to be removed from the memory, isn't it? So if I'm removing that from that variable from the memory, then I can improve the efficient usage of the storage space. But what if I wanted to have the same variable again? Then again I have to retrieve it back from the memory space. So when we are using this object oriented database management system, at the time that will allow me to store that variable which I wanted to access frequently. Then I am going to consider that variable as a persistent variable. So no need to access or no need to release the variable from the memory space, no need to retrieve it back when I require. So instead of that, I'm just going to use some of the storage space or persistent storage space in order to store for program objects. So then that object can be retrieved, can be used as when we require. So that facility is also provided from this database management system, that too with the help of what? Object oriented database system. So with the help of this, we can have a persistent storage for program object. So if you consider a C++ programming language, Java programming or Python, all these programming languages will going to work with this persistent storage, so that complex object in the C++ can be stored permanently in an object-oriented DBMS. So as I told, so if you feel any of the variable that I am using, it needs to be, once the usage is over, it needs to be removed from the memory space. If I wanted to retrieve that again, or if I wanted to access that again that needs to be retrieved back to the computer memory. So if you feel all those as a difficult task, at that time I can store that in the permanent memory which is provided by this object oriented database management system. So it will be helpful for me in order to access that complex object of any of the programming language. So next, what we have, impedance mismatch problem. So if you consider the database or database management system, sometimes the data structure which is provided by the database management system, it's not so compatible with the programming languages what they are using for the retrieval of a queries. So at that time, somehow it will going to be the mismatch between the data structures as well as the programming language. But if I'm using this object-oriented DBMS or object-oriented database management system, this typically offer the data structure compatibility. There will be a compatibility between the data structure as well as the programming language. So it will be helpful in order to make a compatibility between the programming language as well as the type of data structure which will going to be provided by this object-oriented DBMS. So that is also one of the advantage. If there is no mismatch or if there is no incompatibility, then we can have a smooth running of a queries. So if we have a smooth running of a queries, then there will be no wastage of a time, no memory will be wasted. So those are all will be considered as what? One of the best advantage if we have this DBMS approach. So next what we have here, providing storage structures and search techniques for efficient query processing. So as we all know that if I wanted to store large amount of data, then I obviously require a storage space. So that storage space is also going to be provided by this DBMS, and also we have a search technique in order to have a efficient query processing. So I have a large amount of database, I have n number of database along with a n number of tables, and if I wanted to retrieve any of the data and information from any of the table, at that time the processing of that query needs to be very quick. So I can't wait it more than 3 seconds there. So you have to get the data and information or the query, whatever we are giving, immediately we are looking for the resultant. Then how can I improvise this resultant, or how can we have a efficient query processing here, that too with the help of this indexes. So indexes will going to work based on the hierarchical structure or a tree structure, or which will be based on the hash technique. So there I am going to have a indexes. So with the help of that numbering, I can easily retrieve the queries. So as we all know that DBMS will be stored in the storage disk, isn't it? So if it is placed, or if it is stored in the storage disk, at the time we require most efficient data structures in order to access that data from the storage disk of a DBMS. So that purpose we are going to have these many techniques, like we have indexes, buffering and caching, and also we have a query processing and optimization. So with the help of all these things, I can improvise the efficient usage of that storage space. I can retrieve the data whatever is present in the DBMS, which is already placed in the storage disk. So here we have a indexes that will going to work based on the tree-like structure, or it works based on the hash technique. So there, with the help of this indexes, I can retrieve the query, like I can retrieve the data and information which is stored in the database, that with the help of this query. And also we have a auxiliary value, like whichever I am using more frequently, that will going to be stored in the buffering and caching. Instead of sending it from computer memory to the disk, or getting it from the computer memory to the disk, so instead of doing all those things, we are going to have some small amount of memory that will be considered as what? Buffering and cache memory. So it will be more speed than the other type of memory, and it will going to store the data and information which is immediately required for my processing or for my query processing. So that data and information, or that details can be fetched when we have this buffering and caching. And so this query processing and optimization will going to help us in order to access the, like it will give the plan for us in order to efficiently access the query. That is regarding what? Query processing and optimization. It will going to give us what? More efficient way of accessing the query. So for example, if you wanted to buy any of the product, at the time you have to make a comparison, right? So if you are getting that for 100 rupees in one place, and if you are getting same product for 200 rupees and another place, we are going to obviously go with 100 rupees, isn't it? That is what we are checking for the optimization. So when we have this optimization and query processing, at the time this is also will going to help us in order to give a best plan in order to efficiently usage, or in order to retrieve the content in an efficient manner. So that is also considered as what? One of the advantage if you are having this DBMS. So next, what we have here, providing backup and recovery. So you just imagine you have stored your data and information in the database management system. So what if something goes wrong, if anything which is related to hardware and software crashes, at that time where our data and information will going to be stored? So for that also we have one solution here, that is with the help of this backup and recovery advantage, like backup and recovery tool. So whatever we have a data in the DBMS, that is not going to be stored in a one place. So same copy will going to be stored in another place. So if something goes wrong with any of the hardware and software crashes which has happened to any of the system, if the content or whatever the data we have in that DBMS, even though it's gone wrong, then we can get the same copy of data from another system. It will going to have a multiple copies of a same data. So your data and information, whatever you have in the DBMS, everything is safe here. So with the help of this backup and recovery, we can retrieve our data and information back. So that backup and recovery subsystem of the DBMS is responsible for recovery. Then no need of worrying about the data and information, whatever you have in the DBMS. So, and also providing multiple user interface. Multiple user. Already we know the types of user in the previous session. So in the previous session we had a discussion regarding types of user, and when we are talking about the multiple user interface, each user should get the different interface based on their role. For example, you take the example of Book My Show. Okay, being a user or being an end user, I am going to book the slots, or I am going to book the seat for me, the view of that interface will be different. For account section, they will just only looking for whether they have paid or not, whether they are taking only any of the type of digital cash. So they will only look for the account section. So if when it comes to the designer, they will think about designing part. So all the users should get the different views or different perspective of a view. That is also possible when we have this DBMS. So this DBMS will going to provide different user interface for different user. For DBA or a database administrator, the view will be different. For the end user, the view will be different. That is what the screen, what they are seeing, that is what user interface is all about. For every user, the user interface will be different based on the role and based on the purpose why they are using the database. So and also we have representing complex relationship among the data. So if I say complex relationship, what it comprises of usually? So when it comes to the DBMS or a database management system, that comprises of n number of database, right? So it will going to have n number of database, and each database will going to have n number of tables. And each table will going to have a different kinds of data. Then how can I provide a relationship, or how can I provide a compatibility between one data to another data in a single database or with a different database? So when we have a DBMS that has the ability to have this complex relationship representation among the different kinds of data, so that how one data is related to another data of a same table or a different table or even different database. So everything we can get to know in a easy manner when we are working with this DBMS. So that may include numerous varieties of data that are interrelated in many ways. I can't say that one data is not relevant to another data. All the data are may interrelated to each other. Then the representation of all those data in a very efficient and effective manner is also very important. Then we can get that benefit when we are approaching this DBMS. Next, what we have here, enforcing integrity constraint. So as we all know that constraints are nothing but rules and regulations, right? So if I wanted to give any of the data or any of content to the DBMS, I have to satisfy its data type. For example, if I'm having a constraint with respect to what not null, so at the time that column can't be null, I have to fill some data, then only it will allow me to enter the data of a next thing. Like if you see that we have a star, red star, that is what mandatory. So if you miss that field, it will not going to allow you to fill the another content of a form. That is what they are having some constraint. They have some rules and regulation that needs to be satisfied in order to complete the task, right? So for that, enforcing data integrity, let me tell you an example here. Consider I have a student table. Okay, so consider a student table, and that student table comprises of student ID and also student has name, and consider it has marks. Okay, let me consider 1 and 2, and name let me consider A, B, and marks will be 30, 45. Okay, so this is student table, and I have one more table called marks. I have one more table called marks itself. At that time, I am going to use MID, that is marks ID. Then I will take student ID and consider M1. Okay, so these are my columns of this marks table, and these are my columns of student table. So here, what I have student ID 1 and 2, and their name is A and B, and marks is 30 and 40. So here, let me consider MID as 1, 1. 2, 2. So here student ID, let me consider 1, 3, and marks 1, I will consider 30 as well as 45. Okay. So if you see the table of student as well as marks, what is the difference we have here? Is it satisfying the constraint? We'll see now. So here I have taken the MID as 11 and student ID as 1. So what is the student ID 1 marks? That is 30 that I have written. So that means this record is correct. Next, what I have here, student ID as 2. So here MID, that is 22, but I have a student ID as 3. But do we have a student ID called 3? So then the database should not allow me to enter the marks. So it should not allow me to enter the marks of a student ID called 3. Why? Because I don't have a student ID called 3 in my student table. But if I wanted to include, or if I wanted to give the value for that, then I have to create a student ID with respect to 3. Then only I can enter the marks for that student ID 3. So that is what we are having some rules and regulation. So referential integrity constraint needs to be satisfied. So when we have this DBMS, this will not allow, or it will not going to allow us to include or to give the data which is not really existed. So based on the constraints or a rules and regulation, only it will going to allow us to enter the data, so that it will going to enforce the referential integrity constraint. So these are the advantages. We'll see the next advantage, that is key or uniqueness constraint. So as we all know that key is nothing but what that will going to ensure a constraint, or that will going to ensure the uniqueness of a data. So with the help of that uniqueness of a data, by making use of key or uniqueness constraint, I can reduce the complexity, or I can reduce the redundant data. So that is also one of the example here. And also it will going to ensure some of the business rules. For example, you just imagine whatever the data and information that I am storing in the database has to follow some syntax and semantics of a database, isn't it? So when I'm updating new content to the existing content, again that new content has to follow the constraint which is already existed. That is regarding business rule. Whatever the new data we are adding, or whether we are updating, we are modifying the content, whatever the content that we are bringing to the database management system, that needs to be followed as per the syntax and semantics of a database. So then only it is okay to have this business rules. So if we have all those rules, then there will be no redundancy, there will be no duplicacy of data, and data will be consistent. In order to ensure all those things, we are going to have these many advantages. Also, it will inherit the rules of the data model. So it mainly works with the data structures, as well as it works based on some of the operation. Along with that, it will ensure some of the constraints. And also we have permitting, inferencing and action using rules. So what it comprises of then? So we have deductive database system. So before that, let me tell you one example. Consider we have a university. Under that I have a student table, and also I have a hostel table. Okay. So we have two tables, student as well as hostel. Okay, in the student table, I am going to store the details of a student. In the hostel table, we will have a details with respect to hostel. So here, whatever the data we have, there might be a chances of having the same data in the hostel, because those who are all the student of a university, then there will be a chance of living at the hostel. So in the deductive database system, so what it will going to do? In the student table, I will just going to mention the last working day. So last working day of their final year. Okay. So if we get to know the last working day, at the same time, the student has to vacate the hostel. So that means what? Whatever the constraint that I have in a student table is also going to be applied for the hostel. If I get to know the last working day, so same data will going to be help me in order to get to know the last day of the hostel also. So that is what here. So provide the capabilities for defining the deduction rules, inferencing new information from the stored database facts. So that is what I'm just imagining. So if it is the last working day, then there will be a chances of vacating the hostel by this date or within this date. That is what we are using the existing data in order to form a new data. So if any of the student is leaving on that time, again details of that student needs to be removed from this hostel table also. That is what deductive database system. And also we have a triggers. So rule activated by updates to the table. So if the updation is taking place immediately of one table, that will also help us in order to reflect the content of another table. So that triggers will be used. So next we have stored procedure. So in this we are going to have a predefined set of rules and constraints. So that will needs to be repeatedly used by the databases or whatever the tables that we are creating. So that more involved procedures to enforce rules. So all these rules will will be considered as a stored procedure. All the procedure needs to be satisfied by the different operation as with a constraint. So these are the advantages of DBMS approach. Along with that, we have some more approach. We have additional implication of using the database approach. What is the first point? That is reduced application development time. So if I'm using DBMS, then no need to do everything from the scratch. Already somehow it has existed. If I wanted to add a new content or if I wanted to create a new table, I can add it easily. So that development time will be not so much. So no need to do everything from the scratch. And it is more flexibility. Flexibility in the sense what? If I wanted to add new content, I can add it easily. So flexibility in the sense what? The data structure will be very easy or very convenient in order to modify. And also we have availability of up-to-date information. Anyway, updation of each table or each database will going to be reflected, so that updation or up-to-date information will be available to different users on the different perspective. And also economies of scale. So we no need to pay much for this DBMS approach. So when we are taking it initially, then only you must have a powerful processor and storage space along with the DBMS. Then after that, no need to pay much when we are using this DBMS, so that the economy or cost of usage or maintenance will be not so costly. So that is related to economies of scales. So these are the advantages that we can expect with the help of this DBMS approach. So now we'll see when we are not supposed to use a DBMS. So when it comes to the DBMS, we got to know its advantages, applications, and how it needs to be utilized. Everything we got to know. Then I must also know when I should not use this DBMS, because when it is giving all those advantages, if my organization or if my enterprise is not required in order to satisfy all those advantages, then it is no of use in order to use the DBMS. So here, more desirable to use the regular files for when the usage of this DBMS is high. Like when we are having this, we have to pay high for the hardware, software, as well as for the storage. Initial investment will be high. So at that time, no need to use this DBMS. And also along with that, simple, well-defined database application not expected to change at all. So if I don't want it to change the structure of my DBMS, at that time, I don't want it to use this DBMS, because as we all know that this DBMS is flexible in nature. So if I don't want it to change the structure of my DBMS of my organization or an enterprise, then no need of using this DBMS. And when the usage of a DBMS is a problem, at the time you should not use DBMS. So that stringent real-time requirements that may not be met because of DBMS overhead. DBMS is also become a overhead. At the time you should not use the DBMS. For example, you just imagine you have a tea canteen or a tea shop. So at that time, do I really require DBMS in order to store the details of a customer, or how much or how many cups of tea has been sold? So do I really wanted that database management system for my tea shop? Obviously no. So at that time you should not use the DBMS. So embedded system with limited storage capacity. So as we all know that it requires more storage capacity when we have a system with limited storage capacity. At the time you should not use the DBMS. Though I am using, then we are not going to get the required resultant in a required time. So that at that time we should not use, and no multiple user access to the data. If my data, whatever I am storing in the database, is not used by multiple user, then I should not use this DBMS. So this is the things you have to remember when we are not supposed to use a DBMS. I hope you all understood. It's all about my today's session. In my coming session, we'll see about the second chapter of a unit 1, that is with respect to data models. Let me meet you in the next session. Until that, keep learning, keep on growing. Thank you.